Alrighty, Bowhunters, welcome back. I have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Joel Turner on with me. Thank you, Joel, for joining me today, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think it would be rude of me not to ask, how do the Paddy melons taste here in Australia?
Oh, Jack told you that story. I
Yeah, he
they
did say it
are.
online, but maybe give us a quick recap from your point of view as to what happened about the deceit.
Yeah, well, we're out there hunting and there's hogs everywhere and we're going through these fields of flea vein and there's these little watermelons all over the place, right? And I'm thinking, gosh, when I go hunting somewhere, I like to, eat what's around and just kind of dive into the local stuff and I didn't realize that like not even the pigs eat patty melons, right? But all I'm seeing is these little watermelons, right? So I'm going and these guys keep yucking it up about, oh yeah, my dad used to eat them with cream on them. And I mean, they were just, I don't know how they all coordinated this, but they all had a story about patty melons and how good they were. And of course, I'm out hunting and walking past all these things. And then finally, last day we're out there and they were everywhere in this one pasture. And so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try one. So I go over and Jack, I think it was Jack or Ash, one of the guys, they brought me one, like, try this one. This one's ripe. I'm like, okay, cool. So I get out my pocket knife and I cut into it and it looks like a watermelon inside, but it's white instead of pink, like a watermelon, right? And so I'm like, yeah, okay. And that's when the story started coming out about how good they are. And I'm just slicing it and I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, it looks good. So I take I take a bite of it and it was nasty. I mean, it like coated my mouth with this nastiness. I don't even know what the heck it was. And I look up at those guys and they're all filming me, right? And then they all just start laughing. And I'm like, all right, well, screw you guys. I'm going to eat this whole thing, right? Just to spite them. And that's when Ash goes, don't eat them. They're poisonous. So, yeah. So they let me eat poisonous stuff, which was cool. It
Uh,
didn't affect me any. So,
Yeah, it's good that it didn't affect you any, but it also just shows the Australian larrikin coming out, right? The
oh,
the banter that
man.
we can throw is good fun sometimes. In camp,
Yeah, it
you get
was.
to witness it the most, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. It was awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, you've kind of traveled around the world because of the stuff that you've been able to create and bring to not just archery, but also the firearm space in general.
Mhm.
It all comes down to essentially controlling the shot, which I think is really incredible. What you've kind of done is reverse engineered why do we go wrong and how do we go well, and how can we make sure that's a repeatable process moving forward, that's then also adaptable to be able to do that. So what I'd love
Right.
actually is just kind of like, let's get into, I guess, the background. Why did it develop? Why was it a thing that you kind of came across as to like there needs to be a better way?
Yeah, I didn't really realize there needed to be a better way until I became a cop. When I became a law enforcement officer, that's when it really forced me into figuring it out.
Mm,
Because I've been shooting a bow since I was 7 years old, which was 41 years ago. And I wasn't good at it, but I loved shooting. I loved watching my arrows fly, but I couldn't aim at a target for anything. I mean, I would hold 3, 4 feet off of a target and just either dump my bow in and let it go, shooting with fingers all that time. When I first started shooting a bow, there was no release aids that at
yeah.
least I knew of. I was a 7-year-old kid for crying out loud. But it I don't understand. I did not understand what was happening in my own brain, growing up, teenage years, still not able to. I mean, there was no reason to have a sight on my bow because I couldn't put it on the target anyways. But I was good with like a 22 long rifle. I was good with an air rifle. I was good, but those didn't have recoil, and that was the difference because I
Mm,
wasn't having to consciously override my own central nervous system. You put me on a centerfire rifle, absolutely worthless.
yeah.
I mean, I would just, as soon as the crosshairs would get on hair, I would punch the crap out of that trigger and flinch and, close my eyes and do all the stuff that every kid does when they shoot a larger caliber rifle. And it just frustrated me to no end. And then but I always had bow hunting as a sounding board, right? So I was
Mm,
always trying to get better at bow hunting, but all the same time trying to get better in firearms, and all these things came together. I started working for the government, doing some animal damage control stuff, but it was all air rifle work. So
mm,
I was the man. I mean, I was shooting stuff in the middle of cities, for under a government permit. It was amazing, right? But when you put a centerfire rifle in my hand, I was still pretty worthless.
yeah.
And
Is that because you think you were going to anticipate the recoil?
oh yeah, because it was always
Yeah.
a coyote contract, right? So it was
Mm,
always, you get one chance to call in this one problem coyote, and we're shooting like a suppressed 243 or anything, any centerfire rifle, and I was going to punch the trigger. And
mm,
when you do that, you flinch, and when you flinch, you deviate the point of impact of that bullet.
mm.
So I was really good on all the bird contracts with air rifles and shotguns, but you put me on a coyote contract and I was not your guy. And I knew that. And that's what frustrated me, because I was trying to
Mm,
be good at all of it and gain control of it. And I finally gained control of my rifle shot unknowingly, because I bought a smaller caliber. I was shooting a 270
mhm,
on a bird contract, and I bought a 22 250.
hmm,
Because of the lighter recoil, I was able to actually concentrate on the trigger press, not knowing how I did it. And then the first time it came to shoot at an animal, it was a new rifle to me. The safety was in a different place, and I forgot to take the safety off. And I did the same thing, right? So I got on that critter and just, yeah, right. And I just gave it that big old yank, but the safety was on, thank goodness,
mm.
right? Because it would have been another miss, another mystery of why I missed. And so that time the safety was on. I got to see the big old yank. I'm like, come on, Turner, like, get a hold of yourself, man. And that was the first time I actually made a decision to actually do that.
Mm,
I can remember the day and the situation, everything. Brand new 22 250 Browning A bolt with a Simmons 44 mag scope. It was what I could afford at the time, and I remember getting on that thing and yeah, right. And I gave that big old yank, and then I'm like, okay, come on, man, get a hold of yourself. So then I remember taking the safety off, and that's when I finally talked myself through a trigger press.
mm.
And that shot broke as a surprise. It hit dead center, but I never blueprinted how I did it. And so because I didn't blueprint how I did it, it didn't mean anything in my bow hunting. I was still locked way off the target in my bow hunting.
Yeah.
And by this time I'm starting to do competition elk calling and all this other stuff. And so like I can call elk in like a chicken on a string, but I could not hit them. I couldn't keep myself together.
Yeah. Wow.
And so frustrating for so many years. It took me 13 years to kill a bull elk with my bow.
That's crazy.
13 years of frustration
And
and
you
missing.
essentially get like 2 to 3 months max, right? Or yeah,
You
a
get
month and a
you
bit.
get like 2 weeks.
Oh wow, to be able to do
Yeah,
that
it's
each
not
time.
like
So
Australia,
no,
bro.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you get 2 weeks, you get maybe one shot a year,
Hmm.
where I grew up in Washington here, and it was very frustrating because then you got to wait a whole other year to test yourself, whole
Yeah,
other year to test yourself. So it was 13 years of testing and failing.
that's hefty.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And then I became a cop. And when I got hired by the sheriff's office, I'm like, okay, enough's enough. I got to figure this stuff out. So while I was in the academy, I started to figure some things out. I started to actually do a little bit of instruction while I was a recruit in the academy for some of the other recruits, but I didn't realize that I was fixing a mental problem with a mechanical means. So I went to a
Mm,
different pistol system with a much lighter trigger on it, which aided me significantly when I would yank the trigger. I wouldn't have to yank it as hard. So the
yeah,
bullets
got you.
were still kind of staying in the middle. I ended up taking top firearms in my academy class. 2 years into becoming a cop, that's when I became a firearms instructor, and I started to teach at the academy. And that was my testing ground. That's where I got to do the experiments
Mm,
on the recruits and really figure out, okay, how do I get this cop to be able to concentrate on a trigger press when it's the only thing that will save their life or the life of another?
hmm.
And that's when I started to have these little light bulb moments, right? Oh, I said this at this moment in this person's shot. I had them say this at this moment. I took that stuff and I took that into my archery. I'm like, oh, okay, here's how I'm going to control my shot in archery. And this was, let me think about this. This was 2003. And I became a cop in '01, instructor in '03, got on the SWAT team in '03, became a sniper on the SWAT team in '03, got instantly thrown on the sniper crew because I had lots of quote unquote firearms experience. But man, I was scared to death, bro. Like, I didn't know how it was going to go because all I could think about was the coyote that I missed last week,
Mm.
right? That I yanked the trigger on last week. I'm like, man, how am I going to get myself to not do that? And so that's when I really had to buckle down and I started to research the science of how the brain works. And through the experience that I had teaching the recruits, I'm like, okay. So then I started to write about it. And when I wrote about it, I had some way smarter people than me read it. And they would go, oh, this science is actually called neurolinguistic programming. I'm like, ooh,
Hmm.
that's a big word. Never even heard that one before, right? And then we talked about visual proprioception and how it doesn't really help you to keep your conscious mind in the aim. There's no trying to be steady. It does not actually help you, right? So I was able to take that into my archery. Then I started to learn about mechanoreceptors and how, a mechanoreceptor is a sensory receptor in your skin cell, and how that when you, like, if I was sitting here talking to you and I put my hand down on a hot stove, if I didn't know the stove was hot, the mechanoreceptors in the skin cells of my hand send the signal to my brain. My brain then sends the motor program that gets my hand off the stove.
Mm.
That's how that process works. So that's how a clicker on an Olympic recurve works.
So go into that a little bit more because essentially it's giving you a feedback of and that
It's
like, but you're feeling it
a
through your
stimulus,
hand.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a stimulus. So like when you think about the clicker, are you familiar with the clicker on an Olympic style recurve?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when they draw that, they got the spring loaded wire or feeler gauge, right? And they
Hmm.
draw their arrow back to the point of that, then they aim, then they consciously expand, tick, and that when that thing ticks against the bow, it makes that audible click sound. That sound is picked up by the mechanoreceptors in the hair cells of your ear. Your brain then sends the release motor program. So that's why you see the Olympic archer, they'll expand, click, tunk, and then they shoot the shot.
Yeah.
So started to learn about mechanoreceptors. And, I was just like putting out these things that I was learning. And then these very smart people, mostly doctors and such, would go, no, that's actually this. So I
Mm.
would get the right verbiage for the right science. And then I would dive into that. Open and closed loop control systems, the control systems that govern the movements in your brain. They govern all of our movements. There's one that is used for punching triggers, and there's one that has to be used for pressing a trigger perfectly,
Can we
right?
expand on those now that we're here, I guess?
Well, open and closed loop, like I won't get into the tests and the drills that we do in the online course, but essentially open loop is the control system that is used for movements that are fast.
Hmm.
They're fast, they're repetitive, they're smooth and efficient. It's the movement that you've learned. It's swinging a baseball bat or whatever. It's the movement that is supposed to be automatic, right? And it's not supposed to be interrupted because it's too fast to gain feedback within it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So meaning if you're a swing a baseball bat, you can't necessarily stop in the middle of the swing, right?
Right.
It's
Well,
like
you
it's
would, if you did try to, you would completely alter the motor program
yeah.
and it wouldn't be a smooth swing anymore, right?
Hmm.
Well, open loop is what your mind always wants to use because it's the efficient. When we learn something in the cognitive stage of learning where we talk ourselves through it. But usually the movement's very choppy when we're learning it. Say it's a martial arts movement or shooting a basketball or whatever it may be, or shooting a bow. We talk ourselves through it to start with.
Hmm.
And then what do? We practice. We practice with the goal of becoming automatic. And when you reach that automatic stage, that's when your mind is completely using an open loop control system. Basically, you're subconsciously shooting now.
Mm.
The problem in shooting is that your subconscious will always put pre-ignition movements. It will always link those pre-ignition movements, those flinching movements, to the trigger motor program if you allow it to.
Hmm.
Because the core problem in shooting that we're all dealing with is your subconscious mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise.
Yeah, got you. Yeah.
Right? So if it can time the explosion of the bow going off, it will.
Mm,
And along with that timing, right? That's why people, when they punch the trigger on their release, it's not just that they punch the trigger. If this is all that happened, it'd be okay, right? But it's not. It's also grabbing the bow at the
yeah.
same time, right? It's collapsing. It's having a micro collapse at the same time. It's the pin being held off the target, right? If the pin is held off the target, the mind is calm because it knows no explosion's coming as long as the pin's not on the target.
Hmm.
Right? For those folks in your audience that are holding low on a spot or high on a spot, instead of putting their pin actually on it, their mind is calm as long as the pin is not on the target. And then when the subconscious is ready to brace the body, it will drop the pin and punch the trigger simultaneously.
So it's like a massive safety mechanism that's essentially built in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So again, your subconscious mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. If it can time the explosion, it will time the explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And in most sports, that's okay. But in shooting, it's not okay
No.
because
Yeah.
you've got these pre-ignition movements now linked to your trigger motor program, and you don't know which one's coming. You don't know if it's going to be a micro collapse. You don't know if it's going to be grabbing the bow. You don't know which one it's going to be. So, when you watch people shoot with an open hand with no wrist sling, why is their bow not dropping on the ground every time? If they're shooting their trigger properly, their bow should fall on the ground every single time,
Yeah, it's
right?
an interesting
So,
thought. Yeah.
so this is all the things that we've put together, the visual proprioception, the open and closed loop. Like closed loop, so we talked about open loop, smooth, efficient, fast, no feedback. Closed loop is the control system that is used for movements that are slow enough you could stop it. Slow enough you can gain feedback within it. Like if you're pulling back tension on your thumb trigger, right? Or if you're hooked in on your index finger trigger and you're pulling your hand through the strap,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be slow enough you could stop it. And it's got to be your only job. It's the only place. I mean, you can only put your conscious mind in one place at a
One
time.
place. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the place it has to be, is in the pressure increase on the trigger. How do you do that? That's how how do you get into a closed loop control system? Speech. Speech is always the route to concentration. And now we've found out so much more about speech and how it works and how it moves thoughts from the limbic system of the brain to the prefrontal cortex where thinking can occur. The vehicle is always speech.
Mm.
So talking yourself through it, right?
It's so interesting.
So,
We used to do like in my old business I used to run, we used to do a lot of like wellness in the workplace stuff. And what we would help people with is like stress mitigation, essentially. And so teaching them the power of breath, but like what you're saying is essentially we can even overwrite the breath. And yes, yes, breath does activate the parasympathetic nervous system, but it doesn't necessarily, it does even change the state of mind, but you're saying we can essentially override that and get there even faster purely through speech, right?
well, you have to, when you're talking about breath, you're trying to get the breath controlled so that the heart rate gets below a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Once the heart rate gets below a certain level, that is where we are now allowed to think. Because if the heart rate is above a certain level, depending on your
Mm.
physical fitness level, you're going to stay in the limbic system of your brain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You're gonna stay in lizard brain. So, you've got that big stag coming in front of you and you're like, oh my God, that thing is a giant, right? Well, that's a thought, right? And we know now from Ben Mayer, who I think you've had on the podcast.
Correct. Yeah.
Ben Mayer is the one that introduced me to the concept of thoughts aren't thinking, right? Thoughts are what you hear, thinking is what you say. So I took that from Ben and I just completely dissected it, right? He gave me the thoughts aren't thinking principle, and then I just took it and blew it up to the point where now we understand thoughts are what you hear, thinking is what you say. Thoughts
Mm-hmm.
have no instruction, thoughts have no strategy, thoughts cannot solve problems. You can't control the volume of your thoughts, but you can always control the volume of your thinking because that's your voice and it's got to be the loudest one in the room.
Yeah, it's so
right?
interesting, right? It's like the different voices essentially that override in your head each day, the thoughts that you actually have, like thousands or hundreds of thousands of them every single day, those little things, the little twinkers and bits and pieces that happen in the back of your head. That's not necessarily you, right? That's essentially the thoughts and your
Yeah,
thinking is what you're saying
that's
is like what you actually
that's
come to fruition or
right.
pull out of you is the real conversation or the real you.
Yeah, you don't have control of thoughts, and don't try to control your thoughts. Have as
Mm,
many thoughts as you want, but understand how to override them. You can always override them through speech because speech is your conscious mind,
hmm
right? So just use understanding those concepts now, open and closed loop control systems. How do you get closed loop? You got to talk. If you're not talking yourself through the pressure increase on the trigger, you're trying to do it by thoughts alone. You're trying to do it subconsciously.
Yeah.
And the subconscious always has a priority of keeping you safe, not in creating a surprise break on a trigger,
Mm,
right? It doesn't want you to create an explosion as a surprise when it doesn't know it's coming. It would much rather know when it's coming so that it can link the pre-ignition movements to it, so it can brace you for the impact. You see what I'm saying?
yeah. Yeah.
So we're trying to do something that's completely unnatural when we control an archery shot,
hmm
but it can obviously be done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As you've proven many times over, right? And how many people have you had go through Shot IQ?
Oh man, thousands. I'd have to check, but there's been thousands of people
Yeah, it's incredible.
taking it. And then, I've trained thousands of police officers, and there's been a lot of folks that have been impacted by Shot IQ and Mind IQ. So
And that's the other thing that I was going to say is you've essentially taken this whole process that started as Shot IQ and moved it into Mind IQ, which I'd assume that's not just for other sports, it's also for kind of all things life as well.
it is. It's because archery is at the tippy top of concentration.
Mm,
When you can control an archery shot, you can control just about anything, right? So we've taken that science of how we control an archery shot and we've broken it down into, the concept of thoughts aren't thinking, the mental game equation, the ultimate skill of the human being, and actually just plugged all that stuff into life. So how do you get yourself through an anxiety attack, right? How do you manage stress? How do you hit that free throw in the basketball game when it's the game winner, right? When the
mm.
thoughts are very loud with whatever is going on in your life, when the thoughts are extremely loud, how do you override it? So the question, and maybe you've seen this on the interwebs, but the question that I love to ask people now is, if you were able to give me one life skill that has gotten you through everything in your life, what is that one skill?
Yeah, that's interesting. The first thing that came to mind was resilience.
Okay, so let's go with that.
hmm
So yesterday I asked a fellow the same question, and he said the ability to work through pain. Okay. So resilience is another way to do that.
hmm
But how do you get resilience? And this is the thing that's been skipped over. When people give me their answers, it's resilience, it's working through pain, it's mental toughness, it's grit, it's discipline, it's persistence, it's consistency, whatever it is.
Mm,
If I can return to you and go, how do you do that? That means that, let's take resilience, for example. That means resilience is the result of the skill.
yeah,
It's
okay.
not the skill itself, because I shouldn't be able to ask you, how do you do it?
hmm
So the how, the skill, what we now consider the ultimate skill of the human being, is the ability to get loud in your own head with the right words at the right moments.
It's so interesting. That's so amazing, right? I heard this concept in a very different manner yesterday, and it was just online. It was essentially this lady who was saying, like, I've got all of these negative thoughts. They keep overriding my brain, and how do I know? Like, it's I'm letting it control me. What do I do? And he goes, well, if you've got trash in a bin, it's not a problem. It's only when a raccoon or something comes along and pulls it out of the trash can that it becomes a
Mhm.
problem, right? It's littered all over the place. That's when it's a an eyesore and it becomes a problem. So it's like the biggest thing is like you just need to choose which trash comes out and which trash stays in. And I like it's a similar concept, same but very different. But yeah, I think it's Yeah, it's quite amazing, right? As a concept, just you don't know what other people's thoughts are, and I think everyone has potentially positive and negative thoughts. I'm not
Oh,
actually
of
sure
course.
because I'm only seeing it from my side,
Sure.
um, but yeah, it is interesting what people do choose to let out versus what they don't choose to let out, and how that can actually just completely form the individual,
All right.
right? It's what they say at the end of the day is what we take as face value.
So again, the ability to get loud in your own head with the right words at the right moments. So if you don't know open and closed loop control systems, you may not know the right words
Mm,
for the right moments. And the biggest thing is the ability to get loud. Do you know how to get loud in your own head? Right? So many people don't. And many people, because they don't understand open and closed loop, they don't know what mental game they're playing. People say they're playing the mental game all the time, but they never define what the game is.
mm,
So if you don't know what the mental game is, like how do you win a game where you don't know who the other players are? You don't know when the game starts. You don't know the rules of the game, right? You can't possibly win that game, right? So we have to define what the mental game is. So let's say the mental game of an archery shot. Well, what is the mental game? First of all, the definition is understanding where, when, and how to direct your conscious mind into a specific task at a specific moment. Okay, understanding where, when, and how to direct your conscious mind into a specific task at a specific moment. So if you have a problem, now you just plug it into what we now call the mental game equation. So let's take an archery shot because this is a bow hunting podcast, right?
mhm.
So let's take an archery shot. Number one, where do we need the conscious mind in an archery shot? Where would you say?
At what point when we're taking the actual shot, like when we're getting to that
Yeah,
stage?
we're already at full draw.
Yeah,
Where do we need the conscious mind?
the conscious mind should be essentially on the trigger pulling system.
Okay, so the pressure increase on the trigger.
Hmm.
That's the where of the equation. When specifically do we need it there?
The whole time because it's single point focus.
So if you have it there the whole time, you've still got to get through your aim, right?
Mm.
So
Sorry, I thought we were already aiming at the position. So looking
So
at the.
that you would be correct in saying that. So when is after the aim and after we've addressed the trigger.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so we've drawn back, we've got our aim done. Then we're going to address the trigger.
Hmm.
Then, very specifically, that's the moment at which we increase our presence by saying, "Here I go,"
Hmm.
or whatever you would say
Just
to
a
jump off.
mantra in general,
Yeah,
right?
whatever
Yeah.
you'd say to jump off a cliff into water, because that's the embodiment of the conscious override of the central nervous system.
Hmm.
Like you're not going to jump off a cliff into water until you make a decision to do so.
Yeah.
You will always say something internally or out loud. You will always say something before you jump off a cliff. I'm not asking you to jump off a cliff. I'm asking you to step off a cliff slow enough you could stop the movement,
Yeah.
right? Think about how difficult that is, right? Because
Yeah.
essentially you are moving this trigger, you're taking the step off the cliff, and eventually your weight transfer is gonna you're gonna fall off the cliff. Well, that's when
Hmm.
your shot breaks, right?
Mm.
So draw back and aim. Then we address the trigger. Then here I go. Now is when you have to talk, right? So we know the where is a pressure increase. When, after we've aimed, after we've addressed the trigger, and after here I go.
Hmm.
So very specific moment, the when of the mental game, and then how. How do you put your conscious mind in the pressure increase on the trigger? The how of the mental game equation is always speech.
Hmm.
That's when we talk. And it used to be, right, when ShotIQ first started and I first started and all this stuff, it was a mantra. It was keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing for firearms. It was keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling for archery, right?
Yeah.
But it's evolved now. It's evolved to a conversation. So after here I go, that's when you start the conversation with yourself about your trigger pressure increase. It's not just keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. Maybe that's what it is for you. But for most people, they've got to get the movement started. They've got to get the pressure increase started. And when you start it, you're only starting it very lightly until you find the right speed. right? So your initial pressure increase on the trigger is just to find the right speed limit. And once you get into the right speed limit, you just stay in that, right? That's your
Hmm.
only goal. So you start in easy. So it's not just draw back and aim, got it. Looking the trigger, got it. Here I go. Keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. It's hooking the trigger. Here I go. Okay, easy now, easy. Okay, I can feel that. Yep, that's it. Stay in that, stay in that. Squeeze. It's a conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and if people are searching for like, what words do I say? Speak as if you are teaching,
Mm.
and the words will come to you, right? Like you're talking somebody else through this trigger work. And then the words will instantly come to you because you wouldn't say all the crazy things that are going through your head. And the problem is that I didn't have people say, when we first started this whole thing, I didn't have people talk out loud.
Yeah.
I did in the firearms world, but I didn't so much in the archery world. Because in archery, when people talk out loud, they start to run out of breath. And when they start to run out of breath because this shot is taking longer, because their muscles are in tension, because they're holding the bow back, the volume of their thoughts starts to get very loud and it starts to override the volume of their thinking.
Hmm.
Okay. So there they are holding their breath and they're like, oh God, okay, keep pulling, right? And then they would just snatch the trigger because the volume of their thoughts is, oh my gosh, I'm getting tired.
Yeah.
I'm getting tired has no instruction, it has no strategy, it cannot solve a problem because it's thoughts.
Hmm.
So, but now I make them work through that. If they are getting tired, say something about it. Okay, I'm getting tired, but I'm going to work through it, right?
Yeah.
As they're at full draw. And then it's called commentary shooting, right? It's shooting while speaking out loud. Because when I hear you speak out loud, or when you hear yourself speak out loud, or your significant other, or somebody hears you speak out loud, you get to finally understand what you really say.
Mm.
Because if you just keep it internal, you've got a lot of stuff going on in there and nobody ever knows it.
Yeah.
And you never know it. And that's the main problem. So we got to have people shooting while speaking out loud. So now, with me, when you get to full draw, not allowed to stop talking.
So
You have to, you have
what
to
about
talk.
in a hunting situation where you've trained someone to do the talk through and they're in a hunting situation and they're 5, 10 meters off of an animal?
Mhm.
How does that differ then, essentially, because you're not wanting to make noise in that state?
Sure. So commentary shooting is for training only.
Hmm.
It's for you to get your blueprint. It's for you to get what the conversation sounds like.
Hmm.
Because when you get what the conversation sounds like, and you can speak very easily, when the conversation becomes easy, then you understand how you do what you do.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, and only then, can you take that internal. And I'm not talking you got to shoot like 1,000 shots this way, but shoot 20 shots this way, shoot 50 shots this way until the conversation becomes easy, until there's no other option. This is what I'm doing.
Mm.
And that's why it took me so long to figure all this stuff out. Like I didn't figure it out till December 14th, 2014.
Hmm.
That was the day that I'm like, okay, now I'm really starting to figure it out. But I thought it was all the decisions that I was making, right? Because on these few critters that I had some success with on a controlled shot, which was just a couple of shots, I didn't realize how I had done it at the time. But on December 14th, 2014, that's when I shot a big blacktail buck, and I was so pissed off that I didn't control my shot. I finally said, okay, I got to figure this out. And I just sat there in the tree stand, didn't even go look for the deer yet. And that's when I thought back about there was one shot in 2008 and there was one shot in 2010 where I actually controlled myself. And I thought that I had controlled myself because of the decisions that I had made, right? But what I didn't realize was that I got loud with the right words at the right moments
Mm.
during those two shots. And even up to, not that long ago, I was pretty hung up on the decisions, because you usually won't speak without deciding to, because your subconscious has a default. It wants to just run your shot for you, right? Get this over with. As soon as the pin gets on the hair, who cares? If it's 20 meters or 30 meters, it doesn't matter. Just stick a pin on that thing and let her eat, right? So that's where a lot of people are, and that's where I was. And so once I started to figure out the decisions were increasing my presence
Mm.
so that I would remember to speak. But now that I do all this commentary shooting, it's what I've been doing this whole time, but not realizing it
Yeah.
and not having other people do it for themselves. Really talking through, what does your conversation sound like when you are increasing the pressure on a trigger so slowly that you don't know when it's going to go off? What does that sound like for you? And it's probably different for every person. And
I'd
it's
say so.
different.
Yeah.
It's different from shot to shot, even,
Mm.
right? So when you've got a big animal in front of you, or any animal in front of you that causes adrenaline spike, that's nothing more than an increase in the volume of thoughts.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Question I have is around familiarity, and meaning like once someone becomes used to the system, do you find that they shut off from using the system, and then that's when the thoughts start to overtake again? And I guess a concept of this is that I've been doing guided meditations for many years, and then once I got familiar with the guided meditation, I really saw my thoughts start to overtake the whole meditation instead, and you'd get through it and be like, hold up. I didn't just meditate. I just thought the whole time rather than doing the meditation. And so like, I guess as a concept, does that happen with this, or it's just the fact that you have to be ever evolving with the thinking that you're saying internally to make it bigger?
You've got to make a decision. Like, everybody's got a turning point when they finally fail enough to where they're like, okay, I got to figure this stuff out, right? And that's
Mm,
where I was many years ago. And but you have to be disciplined to do this every single time. Like on that day, December 14th, 2014, that's the day I said I will never shoot another uncontrolled shot on a game animal.
mhm,
And I haven't, and I won't. Why would I? Because I
mm,
know exactly how to do it, because I know exactly what my conversation sounds like. And when you are talking, you are thinking. You're staying out of the thoughts, right? So, but if you're not saying anything to yourself during your shot, you're running it on thoughts alone. You may be
mm,
successful, you may not be, but the big thing is you can't blueprint how you did it.
yeah.
You can't blueprint your success, or you can't blueprint your failure. That's where the power comes from, in understanding how you do what you do. And that's what I've taken to everything else with mind IQ, like, training professional baseball teams. And, I trained a PGA golfer the other day, and it's everything, right? It's that one skill, the ability to get loud in your head with the right words at the right
Hmm.
moment. The sciences that we've come upon show us what are the right words, because the words are what direct your conscious mind into specific things, and what are the right moments. And so we've got to understand open and closed loop control systems, so we know when we can fix a movement and when in that movement you can't fix it or you don't want to fix it, right?
Mm,
So, but in shooting is, if that critter is stationary, it's all closed loop stuff. If the animal's moving, it's open loop. It has to be a timed event.
yeah.
So people like, well, geez, if I do your program, then I can shoot really good at stationary critters. But what if the thing's walking past me? Am I going to be able to get through the trigger? Yes. Don't worry, you won't forget how to punch a trigger, right? It's a different mental game, right? So if you
Yes.
have, like, if you've got a stag walking in front of you and he's going to pass between these two trees and he's 7 yards away, whatever, right? Different mental game.
Mm,
Where do you need your conscious mind? In that particular situation, the where is in the aim. When do you need it there? You need it there right when the sight picture comes to fruition. When you see the shoulder start to pass your pin, okay, now it's on there. How do you put it there? Speech, right? So
mm,
when you are doing that, when you're at full draw and you've placed your pin in between those trees, you're like, okay. wait for the shoulder, wait for the shoulder, wait for the shoulder, wait for the shoulder, right? You're talking yourself into the aim,
Yeah.
which normally that is a bad thing because you're going to go open loop on the trigger, but because it's close, it's still going to be an acceptable hit,
Mm.
right?
You've got
But
more
if that
room for
critter is
margin.
now, but if that critter is now standing between those trees at 40 yards and he's stationary, and you're like, okay, it's on the shoulder, it's on the shoulder, it's on the shoulder, you're going to go open loop on the trigger
Mm-hmm.
because you put your conscious mind in the aim and it's not going to hit where you think it's going to hit because there's going to
Yeah.
be pre-ignition movements now linked to your trigger motor program. So are you going to micro collapse? Are you going to grab your bow? Who knows what's going to happen? You don't know what's going to happen. So if they're stationary, closed loop.
Mm-hmm.
Takes concentration. Concentration takes speech. See how this all just wraps
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. It all makes like in my head, it all makes perfect sense. Like, and I'm actually excited just to talk to myself through the shot process because I haven't been doing that. I've been doing aim small, miss small, or pull, pull, pull. So I'm having a conversation, but it's not talking myself through the shot as such. And so I am excited to get into that. As a concept, we talk a lot about the trigger. Obviously, there's different release aids within archery. Is there a system that this doesn't necessarily work on, or it's a repeatable process because it's either a back tension, it's a hinge, it's essentially we're always pulling through the shot to some degree, and so it's just changed the format based on which release aid you're using instead.
Yeah, so it just changes the mental game. It changes the conversation slightly. Like if you're shooting an index finger trigger, if you're just starting into attempting to control an index finger trigger, that's where you take all your fingers off the release, wrap one finger on it, and then you're not moving your finger anymore. You're just pulling your hand through the strap,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your back tension, you're expanding, pulling your hand through the strap, keeping the hook stiff and stationary. And
Yep.
that's what will make the release go off. Now, pulling is a big input into a shot. So easier to control, but not as accurate as less input would be. Like if you could just increase the pressure on your finger like you would on a rifle trigger, then
Mm-hmm.
that would obviously be the most accurate way to shoot an index finger trigger, right?
Yep.
But that's pretty difficult to control because your body is in tension, unlike on a firearm, and your body's not necessarily in tension. So what we do is we kind of mix opening the hand, hooking the finger, and then expanding slightly and increasing pressure on the trigger as a linked motor program. We call it a power squeeze.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the tippy top of the top of index finger shooting, right?
Yep.
And then you've got thumb buttons. There's all kinds of different movements that can be done on a thumb button, pulling or squeezing or dragging your thumb on the button. There's all kinds of different ones. It doesn't matter which one you do. Minimize the input for maximum accuracy,
Mm-hmm.
but you may have to increase the input, bigger muscles in pulling for control in high stress events. They're going to have two different points of impact. So pick one on whatever your game is,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're shooting a hinge, right? We know that pulling on a hinge is easier to control, but it's way less accurate than rolling your fingers on a hinge, right? This is
Yes.
much less input than if you're pulling,
Pulling.
because if
Yep.
you're pulling on a hinge, you might not be actually hinging the release. You might just be pulling. If you pull straight on a hinge, it doesn't go off, right?
Yep. Yep.
So many, if you're shooting like a Vegas round, many people that pull on a hinge are stuck in the mid 290s, right?
Mm.
So if you want to get to 300, you got to start
Rolling.
rolling
Yep.
hinge, right?
Manipulating.
So, and then we've got the Stand Onyx clicker, which is a
Mm-hmm.
thumb button with a click in it. Just like a hinge has a click in it. Why do people gravitate toward those systems? They gravitate toward those systems because the click can be used as a presence point,
Mm.
right? When you press to the click on the Stand Onyx clicker, click, when it clicks, because you did a movement, an adjustable movement, you could have it long travel or short travel to the click. Either one pulls your conscious mind into the release aid or into the movement on the release and out of the aim. And that's a major step,
That's so
right?
interesting because I had a hinge that had a click in it, just the line where it would get to. And every time I'd hit that line, I would jolt and jump and it would come completely off of target. And so I didn't use it. And I've still got it. And I'll go back to it now and through the process of talking through the shot and see the difference of it. But the noise for me would make me like jolt.
Sure. It would make you jolt because you were using it as part of the shot process.
Mm,
Take it out of the process. When you draw back and aim, that's all you're doing.
hmm.
One tap. You draw back and aim, that's all you're doing. Then you roll to the click,
Yeah.
right? It's not, you should never like draw back and click before you've aimed. You don't want that thing to click before you've aimed. And
Mm,
that's been a point of instruction, at least here in the States, for a long time. It was used as a form check. Well, when I started Bodie on this stuff, that didn't make sense to me because the people that were using it as a form check were still coming to me with target panic
problems.
issues,
Yeah.
blending issues. I'm like, well, let's just like separate this thing, right? Number one, draw back and aim. Number two, roll to the click. And when you roll to the click, that's all you're doing.
Mm,
Then here I go. Because going to the click
yeah. Okay.
increases your presence here.
Yeah.
And then you say, here I go. That increases your presence again.
Mm,
And now we're extremely present so that we can concentrate on that pressure increase. And because you've already done it once, click, it's the same motor program after, but it's slow enough you could stop it. So it's open loop to the click, click, here I go, roll after the click,
yeah. It makes so much
right?
sense. Yeah.
A thumb button with a click in it is even better because it has less input. So with the StandOnX clicker, draw back and aim, got it. Press to the click, got it. Here I go. And then you just increase the pressure again just with your thumb, or you can do your thumb and your pinky, but
Hmm.
you don't have to pull on it anymore,
Yeah.
right? Because you just use the motor program that you use to get to the click, that you use to increase your presence. You've already done it once. You get a practice swing at it. That's the beautiful thing
Yeah.
about a click and a release,
Makes
right?
sense.
So just there's so many things in archery and archery instruction that go against the science of how our brains work,
Hmm.
right? And people are trying to build releases and such that work with your brain, but they're making them actual crutches, like a tension
Exactly.
activated
Yeah.
release. Tension activated release is a phenomenal tool for about 2 shots, right? Because what I can do with that is I can manipulate it to where it won't even go off. And I'll have the person, they push the safety in, they draw their bow back, and all of a sudden, because they've got a safety, they're able to aim easily because they know the weapon's not even hot yet,
Yeah.
right? So now for the first time ever, they're like, oh man, I can aim pretty good with this thing. I'm like, okay, take the safety off. They'll take the safety off, kind of, then finally take the safety off. And I'm like, okay, start pulling. And they start pulling just a little bit, and they give it the big old yank,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it doesn't go off. So they get to actually see their pre-ignition movements.
Mm,
And then I have them push the safety back in, let it down, and I ask them, what are you saying in your head? And they're like, well, I was saying keep pulling. But then I said, why hasn't it gone off yet? How
yeah.
much is it going to take to go off? Is this thing even going to go off? Right? Those are all thoughts.
Hmm.
Thoughts have no instruction, thoughts have no strategy, right? So I get them very quickly to say the right things, to put
Hmm.
their conscious mind in the right place at the right time. And the next time they do it, they take the safety off with more confidence. I'm like, okay, start talking. I'm like, okay, I'm pulling and I'm pulling and I'm pulling and I'm still pulling. I'm still pulling. I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. And then it never goes off, right? But they had the conversation with themselves. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, in, let it down. Okay, now, do you know what you said? Yeah, I know exactly what I said. Okay, blueprint the conversation. Now, I'll set the release to where it will go off. They shoot it, bing, it goes off. I'm like, okay, here we go. Now let's go to a different release.
Hmm.
Like, I don't keep people in a tension activated release because it's the easiest release to control for sure,
Mm,
because it has a safety and it requires you to make a decision to do a big movement.
Yeah.
But that big movement is all based on preload. How much preload did you put into the release to start with?
Mm.
So hunting with a tension activated release is pretty difficult because usually you have way more preload and then the thing goes off as soon as you take the safety off. It's the easiest release to control, but it's the least accurate release on the market.
Yeah, wow. And so if you had a brand new beginner coming into bow hunting, what would be your preference for them if they were using the ShotIQ method?
So if I'm bringing a young person in, like let's
Hmm.
say I'm bringing a 6-year-old kid into it, tension activated release all day long to start with, because how are you going to teach a kid to override their own central nervous system? You can tell them all these things and all the scientific stuff that we've got in ShotIQ.
Hmm.
Not going to comprehend any of that stuff. So I had Bodie shooting a tension activated release at 3 years old because at 2.5, he started punching a trigger, an
Yeah.
index finger. I'm like, okay, well, we're not doing this. But at that time, that was 2007. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to put him in a tension activated release because I know what it does, because I know what it did for me back in the
Hmm.
day. So at 3 years old, there's little Bodie pushing the safety in, draws back and aims, takes safety off and just pulls, boop, and his bow goes off and cool. And that's all he knew, right? So for young people, quit beating your head against the tree. Just give them a tension activated release and teach them how to use it. And
What point is the switchover? Like a young person, 3-year-old, 6-year-old, when does it cut off? Like once the frontal lobe's developed at 25, or what point
no,
does,
no, no,
yeah.
no. Just as soon as they understand that's how they shoot,
Okay. Yeah.
they know that they draw back and aim first.
Hmm.
Then they know they take the safety off. Or now with the new release that you've got them, this is when they put their finger on the trigger.
Hmm.
Then they say, "Here I go." They don't understand what "Here I go" does, but they do it when they jump off a cliff too, right?
Yeah.
And number four, they know they have to say something as they're increasing the pressure on the trigger.
Hmm.
So a tension activated release forces them to do that. That's the beautiful part about it. You don't have to sit there and coach them through every single shot and hope that they're getting it, that their young brain is getting it, because it's probably not, right? Because the thoughts of children are very loud.
Hmm.
Thoughts of adults are very loud, but we have life experience to increase the volume of our thinking if we know how to do it, right?
Yeah.
So you just keep them in that. Like I think I took Bodie out of that. I'd have to go back and watch the videos, but like he was working a trigger perfectly by the age of like probably 5.5, 6.
Yeah. Okay.
So he was in a tension release for a little while until that's just the way you do it,
Yeah.
right? And then I was able to just put any release in front of him and go, "This is how we do it."
And so then how about a late onset hunter like myself? I came into it 29. What would you have someone like that start at?
So I'd have you start with a good quality release because it seems like new hunters, they fall prey to bow shops,
Mm.
and they fall prey to them in the way that they sell the most popular release.
100%.
So usually it's an index finger trigger with a bunch of travel and no spring adjustment.
Hmm.
So if you're a new hunter, the first thing I would do is I would research it. I would get a good release, meaning get a single sear design that has spring tension adjustment
Hmm.
and travel adjustment,
Yeah.
right? And learn what that means. You're
Hmm.
going to spend a bunch more money on it, but it's worth it because you don't have to buy 2 or 3 of them,
Yeah.
right?
And are
You
you
don't
having
have to
them adjust it? Sorry.
So adjust it to the point where it's high tension, low travel.
Hmm.
High tension, low. Be careful with your travel adjustment so you have enough sear engagement for your draw weight, obviously.
Yeah.
But as far as the spring tension goes, damn near max it out because you want to be able to wrap into that thing and put a bunch of pressure on it. It's very calming for the mind to be able to put a bunch of pressure on the trigger to start with and like, whew, okay, here I go. And then you start pulling through the strap. And you want it tight enough to where you can actually start the conversation, right? You're starting that. Okay, I'm starting into it. Yeah, I can feel it building, building. Yeah, that's good. A little bit more. Okay, now let's pull from there. Whatever it is, you
Hmm.
got to be, the movement's got to be not long enough, but it's got to be, you have to be able to evaluate it.
Yes.
it can't be so light that you're able to be dainty on the trigger,
Hmm.
right? You want to be able to wrap into it with some pressure, not just have to barely touch the trigger and like, oh, I got to be dainty with this thing. That's like trying to set cruise control on your vehicle at 1 mile an hour, where you're trying to like feather the gas, right?
Yeah.
Not trying to do that. You want to be able to press on the gas and go, okay, that's the right speed.
Hmm.
Remember, the initial movement is just to set the speed limit.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
get a
It's,
good release. It doesn't really matter what bow you get, whatever bow you can afford.
mhm.
Spend your money. If you're going to shoot a compound with sights, spend your money on the release aid.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It,
Do you have any like any brand preferences, ones that you can kind of spout off? I'm sure there's probably 5 to 10 that are great top of the line
yeah,
ones.
there's several. Carter Like Mike 2 is a good
Hmm.
one. Stan Solex is a good one. True Ball makes a good one. Just all the higher end stuff. Like I would
Hmm.
steer probably clear of True Fire.
Yeah.
True Fire seems to have a lot of sear movement, a lot and not much. I would steer clear of the Spot Hog
Hmm.
Wise Guy. The Spot Hog Tough Guy is much better in sear engagement.
Okay.
So, and I'm not picking on brands. I'm just telling you how it is. I'm not
Yeah.
paid by any, like I'm not affiliated with any release aid.
Hmm.
I'm on the patent for the Stan Onyx clicker. Um, but that Stan was the third release company that I gave that idea to. So, and they picked it up and ran with it,
Yeah.
whereas the other people are like, yeah, it's a great idea. I'm like, yeah, well, it's
What are
better
you
than
gonna
just
do?
an idea.
Very
So
interesting.
yeah, so anyways, just good single sear design.
Hmm.
Stay away from roller sears. Roller sears are you've got basically a cup on the trigger and a roller sear
Uh,
that goes into it, and that's the sear that breaks.
yeah.
There's no spring engagement. It's not good.
Okay.
So
So what do you have? Well, what is Bodie shooting now in regards to he started on the back tension, went to trigger. What's he now use?
he shoots a Stan Onyx clicker.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he's kind of the poster child for that thing. So
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as and Bodie was against thumb buttons,
Hmm.
and he was big into hinges. He shot a hinge like we taught him to shoot a hinge, right? Draw back and aim, then roll to the click, then here I go, then you talk yourself through the roll. And he's a phenomenal hinge shooter, but he always had the same uh, just kind of standoffish about thumb buttons because, I mean, Bodie grew up and there's all these pros that are out there, and all the pros, if you watch, they've all vacillated through their careers from a thumb button to a hinge.
Mm.
So they'd shoot a thumb button really well for a little while, and then you'd see them start punching that trigger. And the next tournament, you'd see them with a hinge, right? And then they'd shoot a few turns with a hinge, and then they'd always go back to the thumb button because it was known that a thumb button is about the most accurate system there is. Just because of anchor, how the anchor can come in and the lack of input that's required to make this thing go off.
Mm.
But all the pros, not all of them, but a lot of them would say, well, I like a thumb button, but I get punchy on it, or it makes me punchy, right? And then they would start to not shoot the scores they wanted, and then they'd go back to their hinge because they
Yeah.
felt more control with the hinge because it had a click in it, which brought, no matter how they used it,
Got you.
it
Yeah.
brought more consciousness to the release and the release pressure increase.
Hmm.
So now I had the idea. I'm like, why in the world do we not have a thumb button with a click in it?
Hmm.
And there were some made, decades ago, there was some made, but they were fairly crude. Several people have had the idea, come to find out after I, kind of put it out there. Like, oh yeah, we had that idea. Oh yeah, we had that idea. I'm like, okay, well, where the hell is it at? Because we need it in the archery industry. And so I finally took it upon myself to go, okay, this is what we want,
Hmm.
and this is why we want it. And that's where people were falling off because they never researched the science of how the brain works and
Mm.
what a click actually does in the brain. So that's when Stan took it, and so we got it. And when I gave the concept to Stan, they had the release built in 3 hours. They had a
Wow.
prototype in 3 hours. They next day aired it to me, And I'm like, Bodie, try this thing out. I shot it a few times. I'm like, yeah, this is what we want. And Bodie shot it. His first shot with it was like at 90 yards, right? He was shooting his hunting bow and he's out there shooting. I'm like, hey, Bodie, try this. He's like, well, what's that? I'm like, well, it's the thumb button with a click. And I said, just press it to the click and then increase the pressure on the trigger. He's like, oh, okay. So 90 yards, man. He just drew that thing back, click, pop, broke it as a surprise. And he shot that release ever since.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible.
So it's
So
been really.
I've always used the thumb clicker in the same way that you'd use a hinge of the rotation of the fingers, the roll of the fingers. Is that incorrect? And should it be more of a no? You can do it that way as well.
It's not incorrect as long as the movement is slow enough you could stop it. As
Yeah.
long as it's closed loop, and no matter what movement you do, you should have the control to be able to go closed loop on it. So then you figure out, is it more accurate for me to pull? Is it more
Hmm.
accurate for me to roll it? Is it more accurate for me to squeeze my hand? Is it more accurate to just increase the pressure on my thumb? You should be able to control them all. And now you figure out which movement is
Which one?
most.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
So nothing is wrong as
No.
long as it's not punching.
Yeah.
So
Makes
and
sense.
there's a couple people out there, like there's a few pros that punch the trigger, right?
Hmm.
And they're phenomenal shooters, but they never know when they're going to miss, and you can see the misses happen. I can see the misses happen before they happen.
Yeah.
Like when they put their thumb on the trigger differently or don't quite get to the trigger, all it does is it increases the range of the pre-ignition movement, which that's what carries it out of the X,
Mm,
right? So remember, it's not just that they're doing this. They're not just punching a trigger. There's other movements that are involved in it. So if they're able to actually get to the trigger and punch it, their triggers are crazy light. But if they're able to get to the trigger and punch it, the pre-ignition movement doesn't have that much range of motion for these particular, only a couple shooters that are out there that can do this successfully. Their pre-ignition movement is so minute that it stays in the X.
mm,
But if they stay off the trigger by a half a millimeter, it's completely different, right?
yeah, wow.
That half a millimeter now opens up the range of motion. So if they have a micro collapse with it, now that's got more range of motion before the bow goes off. And that's what carries them out of the X. So
That's very
there's
interesting.
science behind
Mm,
why we miss, why we hit, all this stuff. So I've gone the completely other route. I don't want to dance with that stuff. I want to control the movement
hmm.
so that there are no pre-ignition movements. Because if your subconscious doesn't know when it's going to go off, it can't link. It can't link the pre-ignition movements. So there are none. So that's when you get the surprise break. That's what that means, right?
It all makes so much sense. Like as you spelled it out, it's just like here's the picture. This is why. It makes complete sense. It's kind of like putting all the puzzle pieces together. In regards to the stuff that you've done with Bodhi, is there any? I mean, I don't necessarily follow archery as a sport. I've always come into it from the bow hunting side and been very interested in bow hunting. But from the sport side of things, has there ever been times where, because I know he's pretty unstoppable in a sense at the moment, is there ever been times where he's gone backwards and you've had to readjust things to make it progress again, or is it kind of you because of the
There's no
process?
yeah, there's no reason for him to go backwards
Mm,
because that's the beautiful thing because he knows exactly how to do what he does,
yeah.
right? And his controlled shot is not a mystery. For
Mm,
most people, when they shoot a controlled shot, like, oh man, that one was so awesome. What they do, they grab another arrow,
yeah.
right? And they don't blueprint how they did it. So like Bodie, he just has a toolbox and he knows how to get loud with
Mm,
the right words at the right moments. So if you take, and I know we're going into the target world here, but let's say that, during the Lancaster shoot last year, which was phenomenal, it was, good shooting by a lot of people, but Bodie was able to stay on top of all that, and he had a shot in there that was not going well, right? He had a shot against Mike Slosher in the last, it was for the finals, and Bodie had to shoot an 11 on this one. It wasn't for one of the 12 rings, it was for one of the 11s. And Bodie drew back and he pressed to the click, and I'm in the coach's box, and I know Bodie's shot timing really well. I'm like, oh boy, this is taking a long time, right? And then the commentators start talking. Oh, this is a long hold for Bodie. Oh, it's a really long hold for Bodie. But what's going on in Bodie's head was he drew back and aimed, and on that particular shot, the aim was good, he said. And he said then he pressed to the click, and then he noticed that his hand was shaking. His release hand was shaking, right? So his volume of his thoughts increased. Oh my gosh, my hand is shaking. That has no instruction, that has no strategy.
Yeah.
So he stayed in that world for just a moment, and that's when the shot started to get long, right? Didn't have enough time to let down, but that's when Bodie kicked himself into gear and went, okay, I got to reach into the toolbox, right, and pull out the word squeeze, which is his word that he uses, right?
Yeah.
So the shot kind of went like this. He drew back and aimed. Okay, that looks good. He pressed the click. Oh my gosh, my hand is shaking. Oh gosh, man, what's gonna happen? Oh, wait a minute. Squeeze. Boom, and the shot broke. Dead center 11. If he didn't have that tool in the toolbox, it wouldn't have went well, right? Because he would have probably punched the trigger, which I don't know that he's ever done that, but until he was, he was 2 years old when he did that the last time. But that's just not in our program. So there's no reason for Bodie to go backwards. There's no reason for anybody that gains control of their shot and blueprints it. There's no reason for them to go backwards unless they stop talking.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Right? Now, I'm not saying that you have to talk yourself through every shot. When you're in practice and there's nobody around, do a couple of commentary shots just to check in, right? You have to talk through do you have to get loud with every shot? No, but when it comes to shooting high stress tournaments, when it comes to bow hunting, you've got to have the right conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because that puts your conscious mind in the right place at the right time, and you got to know what it means to get loud.
Two thoughts or two questions. One is around like bow weight, and I guess like 1%ers. Is there anything that people can do, meaning weighting their bow up or having it really light, that can make a difference to actually the aiming side of things? Knowing that you can't necessarily control the aim because it's going to constantly float, but is there things that you can do to, I guess, adjust that? Let's start there, I guess, as a first place.
In the target world, yes. In the bow hunting world, I wouldn't worry about it because you're not looking through a magnified optic.
Yeah, okay.
Target world, you're looking through a 4 to 6 power scope, sometimes an 8 power scope. Whereas in bow hunting, you won't really see the difference. Bodie likes to weight his hunting bow up a bit, but we're shooting some pretty windy environments.
Yeah, okay.
Makes the bow harder for the wind to push, but on the flip side of that, it makes it harder for your mind to bring it back. Right? So just as a general concept of aiming, you want the fastest pin speed you can get. Meaning you want the pin to be very buzzy. You don't want the pin to be lazy and
okay.
around.
That makes sense.
You're like, oh my God, I'm not in the middle. Because if you're, that's a thought, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if your pin is moving so slowly that you can comprehend whether it's dead center in the middle or not, it's too slow and it will draw your conscious mind. So if you have a pin movement that's very buzzy, no matter how shaky it is, as long as the shaking is fast, that's good. It's always coming back to the center. Leave it alone. Just watch it to keep it. Enjoy the show. Right? So in bow hunting setups, people put a bunch of weight on their bow a lot of times, and it's not really doing that much. It's more for balance and feel and the human psyche than it is accuracy. If you want to test it, get control of your shot completely.
Yes.
Shoot your bow with stabilizers. Shoot your bow without stabilizers. You're not going to see a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it depends on what you like for balance and feel. And, is it easier for you to carry through the woods with a stabilizer on?
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
shoot a I shoot a longbow, so I don't like carrying heavy things.
no, and that was actually my next question is we've talked so much around compound and not necessarily anything around trad shooting yet. So let's move on to that. I mean, I've got two longbows, one longbow, one recurve, and it is kind of like my big ultimate goal is to go and get a red stag
Mhm.
with my longbow that I've recently got. So that's kind of like the overarching theme. Oh, sorry, the overarching theme that we've had so far has been a lot around compound. Tell us about the trad world instead.
So the trad world, that's even higher than compound work because now your body's in more tension,
Mm,
right? Because you're holding full weight on this thing, and the farther you
mhm,
pull the doggone thing, the harder it gets, right? So I like to use mechanoreceptive triggers when I
mhm.
shoot my stick bow. So you can't shoot a clicker in most competitions. So I will actually, use a grip sear or a tab sear or an internal trigger. All this stuff is explained in my online course.
Hmm.
But if you're going to shoot triggerless, there's a concept that we've developed from the resistance release that will really help people out. If you want to shoot triggerless, which is totally cool, the safety is the key. Because why, remember in that explanation when I talked about the resistance release, people could draw back and aim very easily when there was a safety on
Mm,
the release aid,
hmm.
right? But there's no safety when we're shooting with our fingers,
No.
right?
Yeah.
No safety mechanism unless we create one,
Hmm.
right? So, and a safety can be any physical movement that requires conscious thought. So, job number one in any archery shot, draw back and aim.
Yeah.
Job number two with the trad shot is to tension up,
So
right?
the
So we're
extra
going to draw
extension.
back and aim first, and then we're going to tension up. And
Yeah.
Tom Clump is the man for learning all this, all how to put the tensions in the right direction. Tom Clump, Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear. Reach out to him. He's got a phenomenal online course, Solid Archery Mechanics. I know it's a plug for him, but he's a phenomenal human being.
Hmm.
He is the form king. But just from that, so number one, draw back and aim. Number two, tension up, which
Yeah.
means that shoulder goes that way, not
Hmm.
that way, goes that way, right? So we're tensioning up until that scapula comes against our spine. Then we take the safety off. And when I say that, like if you've got two fingers on the front of your bow or three fingers on the front of your bow, take one off. Remove a finger from the front
Yeah.
of your
Wow.
bow
Yeah.
as the safety.
Hmm.
And what that will do, because it's a physical movement that requires conscious thought, it will draw your mind out of the aim and out of the tensioning. Those no longer become part of the shot process. They're just things you get done,
Mm,
right? You don't tension up until you've aimed, right?
hmm.
You don't take the safety off until you've tensioned up. So you've got these walls that you can put up between the steps.
Yeah.
So job number one, draw back and aim. Job number two, tension up. Job number three, take the safety off, right?
Hmm.
Just take a finger off your bow and put it away. Don't just move it off your bow. Take it off and do something with it. Make it a bigger physical movement that requires conscious thought.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the fourth step is speech. What are you saying? You are talking about the hold, holding the bow back. So you don't take the safety off and let the string go, right? You take the safety off, you're like, okay, I'm holding, hold on. What would you say to a loved one that's hanging off a cliff and you don't want them to let go?
Hold on.
That's what you say,
Yeah.
right? You are whatever conversation you would have with your loved one that's hanging off a cliff, that's what you have with yourself because what you're doing is you're climbing a hill, right?
Hmm.
Hold on. You're good. Stay in it. Hold on. Check your tension. Yeah, tension's good. You can put anything you want in your conversation.
Hmm.
And your mind is throwing boulders at you. As you're climbing this hill, it's throwing boulders. Looks good. It's a giant stag. You're gonna be a hero, right? It's throwing boulders at you, and every now and again you're gonna get hit by one, and you'll go, huh, right? You'll have your little
Uh-huh.
hiccup. Okay, regain it, start talking again, right? You got to start climbing it. You just got knocked down the bottom.
Hmm.
Start climbing the hill again, right? And these shots are going to take a long time to start with.
Yeah.
But you're not just shooting your bow, you're using your bow to practice the ultimate skill of getting loud in your head with the right words at the right moments.
Hmm.
Okay. So, how long can you hold on the target? That's the goal of that shot, right? So,
Hmm.
you're no longer just out there practicing your snap shooting, draw back and aim, tension up, safety's off. Okay, hold on. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Stay in that. Check your tension. Yeah, feels good. Let's keep going, right? Just have the conversation
Hmm.
talking about the hold, right? And when you get to the top of the hill, that's where calmness lives, right? So you're keep
Mm.
going. Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Oh, I could let this thing go or not, right?
Yeah.
Your
Okay.
calmness is at the top. You're not allowed to shoot until you're proud of your hold,
Hmm.
right? So then when you're on a critter, it's the same thing. It is amazing what happens to your brain when you use the safety concept. And this is all explained and illustrated in the online course as
Yeah.
well. So, but just getting people to separate from the aim, because in the trad world, it's always been pick a spot. Pick a spot, let your subconscious run the shot. That could not be further from the truth. If you want to shoot a controlled shot, that is not the way to go. And that's not
Makes
just my
sense.
opinion. That's just the
No,
science of
it's
how it
actually the science. Yeah. Makes a lot of
works.
sense. Well, it wouldn't be much of a hunting podcast if we didn't talk about maybe some of your favorite hunts. Is there a story that maybe you haven't told, or something that stands out most in your mind of some recent experiences you've had, or experiences over your lifetime, that would be something you wanted to air?
So I had a hunt this year for elk, and it's in a phenomenal place. I am very fortunate with what I've gotten to do in the elk world, and I was allowed to hunt this ranch, and I was calling in. I passed up 10 bulls,
Wow.
and I'd drawn back, and this is all on Instagram. I drew back on a giant 370 bull, and he heard my arrow rest. And it's funny because I was giving Bodie crap about how loud his arrow rest was when he killed his bull. But I'm getting in a lot tighter than Bodie was on his. And I drew back on this giant bull, and I swear this thing heard my arrow rest. I thought it was quiet enough, but then when you get in the Colorado mountains at 11,000 feet, well, evidently things are a little bit different. So the arrow made some noise on the arrow rest. The bull heard me. I'm like, man, I just, it was a tough situation. The bull stopped because he heard me. He stopped right behind a tree, and then he walked off, and he passed the shooting lane at 35 yards again. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that, which is a shot I can make all day long. But on elk, I'm very careful. So the hunt goes on. I pass up all these bulls. And on the second to last day, I call in this big 6x6 bull to 17 yards. And you talk about thoughts aren't thinking with this. And what happened is the bull came in, he finally broke the barrier. He was at 25, screaming his brains out. I finally, with some very almost inaudible calf sounds, I got him to break the barrier, and he comes into 17. And now I was shooting my Black Widow recurve. And when I call bulls, and I always keep my bow, I keep my arms relaxed, kind of against my body. My bow is very close to my face. I keep the top limb in front of my face because I don't wear a face mask or any of that stuff. I always keep the limb right in front of my face. And the bull comes into 17 yards. I didn't know it was 17 yards at the time. I knew it was close. I knew it was under
Hmm.
20, which is cool. And I had my bow close to my face, or close into my body. But what I didn't realize was there was an aspen sapling that was right beside me that curved up over my head.
Yeah.
Right. And when I brought my bow in, when the bull came and I brought my bow in, I actually hooked behind that sapling on my recurve limb.
Yeah.
So then when I go to shoot the bull, of course, I push my bow out, which loads the sapling against
Hmm.
my limb. So I had this weird resistance. I'm like, but I didn't think much of it because like all the aspens were behind me, and I never
Mm.
saw this one that was like literally growing up right beside me. So as I push my bow out, I'm feeling this resistance. And then when I draw my bow back, course, it rides my limb the whole way because it's going back to its natural place. So it's against my limb. So I'm at full draw and I'm aiming at this critter, at this big bull, and I was shooting a tab sear, which is just an edge on the sear or edge on the tab plate that I actually run my thumbnail on. When I pop that, it's like a clicker. So I
Mm.
pop that, and that's what sends the signal to my brain. My brain then sends the release motor program. So my shot normally is draw back and aim, tension up, and then I set the sear. So I'll put my thumbnail on on the edge of that tab, and then I just simply increase pressure with my thumb, bink, and that thing pops, and then I shoot, right? Just
Yeah.
like a clicker.
Mm-hmm.
So there I am. I'm at full draw on this bull. I'm looking at the perfect sight picture. I mean, it's gonna smoke him. And but he walked behind some limbs, a down tree, and there was some sticks, but his chest was right in between.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, that's the spot. And I'm like, I get on my sear, I'm like, here I go. And I start working through the sear, and I hear tick, 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 right? And I'm the limb, because now I'm shaking because
Yeah.
I've gotten out of my shot process, right? Now my thoughts are increasing, and the thoughts are, what in the hell is tapping on my bow? Right? And you can hear it in the video, like that, 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 and now you can see, I mean, you can visibly see that I'm shaking, and the shot's not going because my sear's not breaking because I'm thinking about the stupid limb on here and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
increasing pressure on my sear. So I had to bring myself back and go, hey, stupid, you better get through the sear, right? So I'm like, come on, work, 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 pop, and it goes off. And when it goes off, it's like I pulled the forest down. I mean, that thing rode my bow limb the whole way forward. The shot goes way left and down, and my bow just about falls out of my hand, and
Oh no.
it was a nightmare. But talk about, these things that can come in that increase the volume of your thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to increase the volume of your thinking, which is your voice, and it's got to be the loudest one in the room.
Such a perfect example of it, right? It's
Oh
nice,
God,
nice
yeah,
to know that you've got that toolbox to be able to pull into, right? And it's like,
yeah.
how long does it take to build that? It doesn't matter. It's just about having that in your
Like
um.
it really literally only takes one shot.
Yeah. Wow.
One shot for you to go, okay, this time I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And then you talk yourself through it. And it will come much faster if you talk out loud.
Yeah.
Because then you really get to understand, what did I really say? Because you're listening to yourself when you're talking out loud, right?
Yeah.
So then you break that shot and you're like, okay, blueprint it. What did I say and when did I say it? And that's not just in bow hunting, it's in whatever success you have. What
Mm,
did I say and when did I say it? Getting loud with the right words at the right moments. That's the skill. That's what you're using your bow to practice.
yeah.
Not practicing shooting your bow. You're using your bow to practice the ultimate skill.
Yeah. Absolutely love that. So incredible. Last question before we kind of wrap things up. Elk calling. You said that
Mhm.
you got big into competition elk calling. You just said that you called in 10 bulls.
Well, I called in 38 bulls total this
Oh
season.
my God, that's insane. So obviously you're good at what you do there. What's kind of like, I guess, the secret or the unknowns or the things that you kind of focus on to really make those bulls come to you?
So this is the same thing with red stags. It's just a different sound, but it's the same structure of speech that I found in New Zealand as I find here with elk, right?
Hmm.
So when bulls or stags chuckle, it's a bull to bull, stag to stag communication.
How do you mean chuckle?
Like, yeah, when
Yeah.
they do that, when an elk bugles, right? They'll do their bugle and
Yeah.
at the end. The stags do the same thing. It just sounds slightly different, but you can hear their chuckle as well, right?
Hmm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
just a different sound. When they do that, that's a bull to bull communication. Okay. Now, cow elk are much more vocal than hinds are.
Hmm.
So, but I never make mature cow sounds. So when I went to New Zealand, I never made mature hind sounds. I always
Just
kept it on the
spawns.
cap spectrum.
Yeah.
right? So in the elk, do they call a baby stag or a baby red deer? Is that a fawn?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so always keep it on the fawn or calf spectrum,
Yeah.
because when you do that, you're not a sexual threat to the hinds or the cows,
Mm.
right? And stags, just like bull elk, are pedophiles. They don't care how old they are, right?
Yeah.
So, and you will call in hinds that way, and the stags will follow. You'll call in cow elk that way, the bulls will follow. It's this, they are so similar.
Hmm.
So there's not a lot of hind vocalizations on the internet, but there are a few.
Yes.
So, and one of them in particular that I have is of a very young hind.
Hmm.
So that's the sound that I emulated when I was in New Zealand. I called in 6 stags
Yeah. Wow.
when I was there. So it works exactly the same. They came in exactly the same. It's just so, but on the chuckling it. So if you're doing female sounds, keep
Hmm.
it on the fawn spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're gonna do if you're going to bugle, if you're going to roar, when bulls bugle with no chuckle, they're talking to cows. When stags roar with no chuckle, they're talking to hinds.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you've got a stag with a bunch of hinds, you get in tight as you can on the hinds and you roar with no chuckle.
Mm.
Then you're talking directly to the hinds. He has no option but to remove you. Right? So think about this. If you and I, Maddie, were at the doorway of the bar,
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, Maddie, you got 30 seconds to go in the bar and get in a fight with another male. You can't use your hands, you can only use your words. 30 seconds. What's your strategy?"
Go talk to a female that he's with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? But what do most people do in the elk world here in the States? Everybody wants to bugle with a chuckle. Well,
Mm.
that's you walking into the bar and talking to a dude. You talk to a dude, and it depends on his attitude whether he fights you or not.
Yeah.
You talk to his female, he has no biological option but to remove you from the area,
Yeah.
right? So when you're doing your roaring, get in tight on the hinds and roar with no chuckles. If you're elk
That's awesome.
hunting,
Yeah.
get in on the cows, bugle, no chuckles. Then you're talking directly to the females. He has no option but to remove you from the bar. The stag pastures, the elk woods are no different than a bar scene.
Yeah.
They are simply mammals with no societal limits.
That's an absolute game changer. Like I just knowing the chuckle side of things. I didn't know that beforehand. This year was actually the first year that I used fawn calls a lot more, but I would
Mm-hmm.
do it in succinct with a hind call and then lots of fawn calls. So essentially it was saying like this is a sexually active hind because she's got a kid. That was my concept around it, but it makes a lot more sense just because
But
I had
the
yeah, stags come to me.
here's the problem with, here people in the States, you learn 2 calls. You
Mm.
learn cow calls and bugles with chuckles.
Yeah.
That's what you, right? And that's what everybody uses, and they're biologically incorrect.
Hmm.
Like, when was the last time a bunch of human females got together and spoke nicely about another female that wants to procreate with their man that they've chosen as a group?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, right? So if you go in close to hinds and you hind call a mature hind sound, you've completely blown it apart. They will not let their stag go play with the hussy in the bushes,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I say keep it on the fawn spectrum. That way you're sexually neutral. Everybody wants to help the infant,
Yeah.
right?
Makes a lot of sense.
No hind calls, no mature hind calls, no mature cow calls at all.
Mm.
All on the calf spectrum or the
So
fawn spectrum.
if you've got a male that is chuckling, talking to the boys, what's like, how does the game plan change? It's just the calf call then.
It only matters whether he has hinds or not.
Mm.
If he's got hinds, then you go in and you do the stag call and hinds bugle or the stag call and hinds roar, right?
Yeah.
It's just no chuckles. That's the structure.
Yeah.
If he's got no hinds, then just calf call him in.
Mm,
Because if he would come into a mature hind sound, he would even more readily come in to a fawn sound.
yeah.
Which one's got more experience? Which one do you think he's got better chance of procreating with?
Yeah. The young
Right?
one. Yeah.
Young one. That's the way it works. That's the biology of mammals. So let's use it against them.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a simple. I love that. I think that's what I love about everything that you put out, Joel, is the fact that you break it down to the simplest form possible. So it's like, of course, that makes complete sense. Now it's just about applying that simplicity to it. So the same thing you've done just now with the stags and the elk,
Mhm.
the same thing that you do with your shot process. It's simple, it's easy to understand, and it makes it just so simple to be able to go forward and utilize and use. And I think it's just so incredible. And I would really recommend that everyone goes across and jumps on ShotIQ and gets a part of that. Go on to Mind IQ, especially if you're looking for things outside of archery. And I know what you're saying about like everything that we do within archery is transferable from what we do here out into the outside world. And like I said, I took a friend out who's doing really well in business recently, and he was like, it's so interesting to see the overlap. Like I told him about it, but then when he actually got to witness it himself, he was like, wow, I can actually see it. So yeah, I guess for performance in general, not only shot IQ, but also yeah, mind IQ as well. It's
If,
incredible, mate.
if folks want to see kind of the mothership website, it's turnermodel.com.
Hmm.
And that will you can get to both the Shot IQ course and the Mind IQ course from that website. But that tells kind of the story of where we're coming from and how this all developed. And if you just want the shooting stuff, go to shotiq.com. If you want the Mind IQ stuff, it's mindiq.com. Again, you can get to both of those places from turnermodel.com. And it has been a fascinating journey,
I can
just learning
imagine.
all this stuff. And now that I deal with all these business people and professional sports teams, and I'm just like, I invite their problems. I'm like, just give me your problem. We'll plug it into the mental game equation. We'll use the ultimate skill. Thoughts aren't thinking. Thank you, Ben Mayer, for that. And yeah, it's just been a phenomenal journey.
That's incredible. I bet 20-year-old Joel would have no idea that this was what your future would look like, right?
Oh no, no, I was just going to be a cop for a long time, but
Yeah.
I've been able to retire from that and I just do this, which is much more impactful.
Definitely, man, and you're doing an amazing job at it. So thank you very much for what you do. Thank you for putting it out in the world. Thank you for being so giving with your information as well, because I think so many people do hold this stuff back, and you're literally giving us the fort. You're like, here, go take it and go forth. It's
I
incredible.
just, yeah, I just don't want people to live the frustrated life. There's no reason for
Mm,
it. The code has been cracked. Let's go.
yeah,
Right?
that's incredible, man. Well, thank you, and thank you very much for your time.
You bet.